5 special report.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Scott Arnold. We interrupt golf to tell you about a major breaking news story we are following. We have just learned through multiple police sources that former Tennessee Titan Steve McNair has passed away. That's right.
Nashville is a city full of dreams and beautiful young women destined to work hard to be a star or perhaps meet the man of their dreams. One of those women was Sahel Kazemi, a native of Iran who had endured a rough childhood when her mom was murdered in a robbery/home invasion. Shortly after the tragedy, she fled with her sister to live in Jacksonville, Florida at the young age of 13. Then at just 16, lacking a high school degree but optimistic, she followed her boyfriend, Keith Northfleet, to Nashville, where he was seeking stardom as a rapper. Fast forward a few years later, and Sahel is still in her teens. She is now broken up with Northfleet and is working as a waitress at Dave & Buster's. The young girl, described as full of smiles, meets a man that she instantly connects with. That man is Steve Air McNair, a former Tennessee Titan quarterback, a former NFL MVP, and a notorious man about Nashville. Unfazed by the ring on his finger, Sahel gives McNair her number, which leads to a whirlwind romance that unfortunately would end in the ultimate tragedy: murder at the hands of the mistress. Kazemi always said someday she would be famous, and now she was. Break! Steve McNair was born in Mount Olive, Mississippi on Valentine's Day in 1973, and he died on the 4th of July in 2009 in Nashville, Tennessee. A standout prep at Mount Olive, he chose to attend the historically black university Alcorn State, where he was promised the quarterback job. The University of Florida offered him a position at running back, but to be under center was the only position Steve had ever dreamed of. After a star-studded and impressive collegiate career that featured a Walter Payton Award and him becoming a Heisman Trophy finalist, Steve would be headed on a fast track to become a fixture in the NFL. Steve would be taken as the number 3 overall pick by the Houston Oilers in the 1995 NFL Draft. At this time, he was the highest black quarterback to have ever been drafted. His career in Houston was cut short because 2 years later, the Houston Oilers would move to Nashville, Tennessee, and it would officially change its name from the Oilers to the Titans in 1999. And boy, would they start out hot in 1999, as Steve McNair would lead the Tennessee Titans to a Super Bowl from the wild card. This magical Cinderella-esque run featured iconic moments in NFL history, such as the Music City Miracle, yet the Tennessee Titans would miss the Lombardi Trophy by literally a few yards. Yet, Steve McNair would still ink himself a brand new 6-year contract that was worth $47 million. During his career with the Tennessee Titans, Steve McNair would lead his team to the playoffs 4 times. He would get selected to the Pro Bowl 3 times and was named co-MVP in 2003, where in that season he would put up 3,215 passing yards, 24 touchdown passes, and only 7 interceptions. That year he would also hold a quarterback rating of 100.4. Steve McNair would then go on to join the Baltimore Ravens for 2 years before he would eventually retire in Nashville. But just because Steve McNair ended his football career doesn't mean he didn't have big dreams in Nashville after his retirement. He had just opened a catfish barbecue restaurant in North Nashville and was dedicated to being a good father to his youngest 2 sons. However, his post-retirement dreams were cut short. You see, Steve McNair, at the age of 36, was supposedly murdered by a 20-year-old Dave & Buster's waitress who was one of his mistresses. The key word here being supposedly, as you're gonna see, the murder is a very messy one that doesn't really have a clear-cut answer. Here's what happened. On July 4th, 2009, Steve left behind his wife Michelle, who he had been married to since 1997, whom he shared 2 sons with, Tyler and Trenton, and he also left behind 2 older sons, Steve Jr. and Steven, from relationships with 2 other women before he married Michelle. How could an NFL legend, a fixture in the city of Nashville, and an icon in the state of Mississippi get caught up in a mess that ultimately ended his life? 105 Leah Avenue, Nashville, Tennessee, is a small condo complex located just a few blocks from Nissan Stadium, just across the Cumberland River via the Korean Veterans Memorial Bridge and situated behind an award-winning southern restaurant named Husk. That address, for many associated with the Tennessee Titans and fans of Steve McNair, will live in infamy due to the tragic circumstances that happened in the early morning hours of July 4th, 2009. You see, that residence was basically a bachelor pad for the married Steve McNair, a place that Steve had rented from a friend named Wayne Neely, whose name was on the lease, and this arrangement was unknown to McNair's wife at the time, a wife who thought the only real estate that Steve had was his newly opened restaurant in North Nashville, in addition to his fishing hole, which he visited frequently, and the almost $4 million home in Green Hills that he shared with her and their 2 sons. Steve McNair had known Wayne since 1997, and in police statements he voiced to authorities that 3 to 5 years prior, Steve told Wayne that he was in need of a place to chill. Thus, Neely rented the unit and McNair paid him the monthly rent. Wayne had the keys to the condo along with McNair, and Neely didn't know if others had keys, such as friends or mistresses, but obviously Sahel, Jenni Kazemi, who was in a dating relationship with McNair and had frequent access to that unit, number 4 of 105 Leah Avenue, where she would meet up with McNair recurrently. Who was Sahel Kazemi? The woman of just 20 years old, who had filled the headlines of the last 11 years? Well, Sahel was a refugee from Iran who had lost her mother at a young age in her home country and thus moved to Jacksonville in her teens with her sister. She followed a high school boyfriend, Keith Nordfleet, to Nashville 4 years prior, and although they had just broken up earlier that year, she still visited him from time to time. Sahel was without a high school diploma, and she was working as a waitress at the Opry Mills Dave & Buster's, in a location known for being visited by current and former NFL players and celebrities at the time. Although she didn't graduate high school, she could speak 3 languages, and was described by friends as beautiful, bubbly, charming, upbeat, and very into the club scene. Sahel was only 19 at the time. Her and the much older Steve connected when he visited Dave & Buster's in December of 2008. She gave him her number and they started a romantic relationship shortly after meeting. The relationship, sugar daddy-ish or not, progressed quickly, with Steve McNair paying the down payment of a Cadillac Escalade for her 20th birthday that May. Steve would also take Sahel on vacations or rendezvous to locations such as Key West and Las Vegas. Steve had even brought her home to Mississippi to meet his extended family. Sahel was head over heels and even mentioned to friends many times that McNair was planning on divorcing his wife so they could begin a life together. However, the life of a mistress is not always the most pleasant life. That May, Sahel saw another woman leaving the condo on Leah Avenue, in which she quickly became aware she wasn't Steve's only girlfriend. Then, in the beginning of July, the world really started to unravel for the young woman smitten with Steve McNair. Kazemi had told a friend that on July 1st, she had found used condoms in McNair's condo. Sahel was also having financial difficulties as her roommate had just moved away, leaving her with a $1,000 per month rent payment for an upscale apartment along with the $800 per month payment for the Escalade, the car that McNair had put a down payment on but wanted her to be independent by making the monthly payment herself. On July 2nd, while driving Steve and his friend Casper Gordon around downtown Nashville, Kazemi was pulled over and booked for driving under the influence. Steve McNair had connections that night and was able to get a ride away from the scene via a taxi driving friend to avoid any interaction with the police, and then later a ride to a bond company to bail his girlfriend out of jail. Earlier that evening, while Kazemi was at work, her general manager noticed her attitude was again off, just as she had been the entire week earlier, as Sahel was not acting like her usual positive self. She had also spent an unusual amount of time while on the clock that evening talking to a black male that was not Steve McNair, but a man named Adrian Gilliam, a man who she was having discussions with about how she would be able to purchase a gun. Sahel didn't have to wait long, as the next day, Gilliam sold a handgun to her for $100 in the parking lot of that Dave & Buster's restaurant. The next day, on July 3rd, the shift manager at the restaurant where Kazemi worked had an interesting conversation with her when the manager asked her if everything was alright. Her response was, "My life had just turned to shit." The manager then asked about the possibility of Steve McNair getting a divorce, and the result was Kazemi rolling her eyes and following up with, "My life is just shit." She left Dave & Buster's at 10:07 p.m. on July 3rd, never to return. To throw another person into the extramarital affairs web, Steve McNair had at least one other mistress by the name of Leah Ignagni. Leah and Steve began seeing each other in May. Remember the woman Kazemi saw leave the downtown condo? Well, apparently that was Leah. After McNair died, Ignagni had told the police that she had observed a woman in a black Cadillac Escalade following her after she left McNair's downtown condominium. She said she saw the same vehicle on her street or circling the block several times in weeks following the first instance. Leah also told investigators that McNair came to her apartment around 4 a.m. on July 2nd, mentioning that a good friend named Jenni had been arrested for a DUI. Ignagni said late Thursday, July 2nd at approximately 10:30 p.m., McNair returned to her apartment and spent the night. Leah then said when she woke up on the morning of Friday, July 3rd, McNair had left her apartment very early to open his restaurant, and she would never see Steve again. It is now late at night on Friday, July 3rd, and Kazemi was off of work from Dave & Buster's, and the last text message conversation between McNair and Kazemi took place. In fact, it was the last text conversations they would each have with anyone ever. At 10:30 p.m., Kazemi would text McNair, "Do you want to get out and drink?" Steve McNair would answer 12 minutes later, saying that he's having trouble getting the kids to sleep. 10 minutes later, Kazemi would respond, "Okay, but I am going to the condo in a minute." And McNair would respond, complying. At 1:14 a.m., Kazemi would text Steve the final text message that Steve McNair would ever receive and the final text message that she would ever send, saying that it's open. Now, sometime in between 1:14 a.m. on July 4th and the break of daylight at 105 East Leah Avenue, Unit Number 4, Sahel Kazemi, using the handgun she had purchased just a day earlier, fired 4 shots, the first into the left side of Steve McNair's head at point-blank range, the next 2 in his chest, and then after positioning herself on his lap, fired the 4th shot, ending her own life. She then fell to the floor where both of their bodies were lifeless. His on the couch where he probably had been sleeping, and hers on the floor. The pair remained untouched until well around 1 p.m. on the 4th of July, when Wayne Neely arrived at the condo as he had seen McNair's car there and had tried to call him several times as he needed to talk to Steve about a Little League appearance. Wayne initially thought the two were asleep after he entered the condo and walked to the fridge to get a beer. You would think one would smell the blood upon entering or think it was strange to see a woman positioned in that way on the floor. After cracking open the beer, he turned around noticing 2 dead bodies, proceeded to pick up a shell casing, put it back down, and instead of immediately calling the police, and this is where it gets really sketchy, Wayne would run outside to get into his truck and call one of Steve's best friends, Robert Gaddy, and a judge. When Gaddy arrived, he saw that one of the bodies was McNair and made a panicky 911 call, but did not tell the operator that it was McNair.
Somebody's been shot. There's 2 bullet wounds, 2 gunshots.
However, soon the whole world would be informed of the passing of Steve McNair.
Tennessee Titan Steve McNair has passed away, that's right.
It wasn't a long investigation that followed. Afterwards, the Nashville Police Department reached their conclusion with the evidence file neatly wound against Kazemi. However, in the midst of the days, months, and years that follows, there are still some questions surrounding this high-profile case of one of Nashville's adored sports figures. In some instances, there are details that don't quite add up. One former investigator pointed out that after reviewing police notes, it listed McNair as only having $6 in his pocket. The investigator had spoken with McNair's friends, who said the quarterback thought he was broke if he didn't have at least a couple of thousands of dollars rolled in a band on him at any given time. It also came to light that McNair had been out to at least one bar that night, and his body had a blood alcohol level of nearly twice the legal limit. Remember the reason Kazemi went to Nashville to follow her then boyfriend Keith Northfleet, an ex-boyfriend that she would still see from time to time? Well, Keith, although he had a solid alibi for the middle of the night and morning, had written and recorded some rap songs that were available for download, one that described as taking revenge on a cheating couple. Even years after that tragic night, Kazemi's family and friends deny that she would have the capability to shoot someone or even kill herself. Then, there are random people who wanted the case reopened, such as McNair's high school sweetheart and the mother of his first child, Steve Jr. The woman, Kotina Fizel, said, "I can't see how Kazemi did the perfect shooting for one thing. This was her first time using a gun. I think there is so much missing in this case." There are also others who wonder why Wayne Neely, the first one to encounter the deceased couple, called at least 3 people and then waited for 45 minutes before a friend called 911. All we know for sure is Steve McNair, a great quarterback, was taken from the world too soon in a senseless act of violence. Every 4th of July, and even in remembrance moments scattered throughout the year, family, friends, former teammates and coaches, and Titans fans will shake their heads and even scratch their heads when it comes to discussing the murder of Steve McNair and the possibility that it may not be all it seems to be. Thank you for watching this video. If you guys made it to the end and you enjoyed it, make sure to leave a like and be sure to check out our first episode on Marvin Harrison. Also, I wanted to give you guys a choice. Which murder documentary should we create next? Should we cover Ray Lewis's accused murder or Sean Taylor's murder? Please let me know in the comment section down below, and I'll catch you guys in our next upload.